We'll bring the Jobs and Economic Development Committee to order. We have two items on the agenda today. House File 4611. And then we were asked by Deed if they could explain a glitch caused by this pandemic and their fix for it in case we need an opportunity to attach it to something or whatever, but at least I want people to be aware of what they're trying to do. I am sure, let's see, Representative Mecklin, I am sure, has looked at the minutes and would like to move the minutes from our last meeting.
I have, Chair Mahoney, and I'd like to move the minutes.
Thank you very much. All those in favor of the minutes? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 We have a set of minutes that were passed. Thank you very much. Representative Gomez. File 4611. I will move the House File 4611 to be passed and sent to Ways and Means. That's almost a question, Representative Gomez.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. That's the motion
Okay.
in front of the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Why don't you present your bill and we'll try. I don't know how many testifiers we totally have. I think it looks like 3 or 4. We have some people from DHS that might have to answer questions and proceed.
Mr. Chair, could I ask someone to move the A3 for me?
Sure, I'll move the A3.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Would you explain it and we'll vote on it?
Certainly. So the A3 amendment gets the bill in the shape that we want it. It sort of is interesting because the amendment basically takes the bill out of the jurisdiction of this committee, but it was drafted after it had already been referred here and it's the last week of session. And so here we are with sort of a little strange situation. But the original bill appropriated money for COVID-19 emergency community relief grants via the Deed Commissioner and the Minnesota Council on Nonprofits. After a lot of conversation with Deed and the Department of Human Services and the administration, governor's office, we've changed the approach as far as pushing the money out into community. So now the A3 amendment changes that disbursement to appropriating the money through the Commissioner of Human Services via the Community Action Partnership Network, which operates throughout the state of Minnesota. So that's sort of the substance of what the A3 does to the bill.
All right, so let me Representative Gomez, if I may ask.
Yeah.
So what you're doing here, this is literally the wrong committee.
This is literally the wrong committee now because of the A3.
Right, because of the lateness in session. We are all intelligent people who are elected officials. So we're going to go over the how much and where it's going to go to whom. And, you know, with the indulgence of the committee, we'll let higher ups figure this piece out. But we will just keep our questions towards who gets the money and how much and where is it coming from, and let the appropriateness, if it fits into an HHS budget or has to stay in Deed. I would ask the committee to allow us to leave that up to higher ups to negotiate at some other point. And they can make the change in Ways and Means or rules next week. So all those in favor of the A3 amendment.
So the first is, what level of support are you seeking? I have some ideas that are consistent with past projects and what I think
somebody needs to mute.
Like your
somebody needs. So I will move the A3 amendment as explained. All those in favor signify, or do we need to do a roll call on this? Well, we'll see if we need a roll call.
Mr. Chair, generally the roll calls have been on the final bill in other committees, but it's certainly up to you. I also wanted to clarify the noise you heard. I think we were getting feedback from House Info because I unmuted everyone and it sounded like we were getting noise from a separate hearing going on right now, which I've heard has been a problem occasionally. So when members vote, if they could unmute themselves individually rather than me hitting unmute all, I think that would solve that problem. So please, members, if you can, please unmute yourself before we vote. Thank you.
We're going to do a voice vote on this because it's really not in the jurisdiction of our committee. All those in favor of the A3 amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
No. Aye.
Aye.
3. So I'm going to say that my ears, even as deaf as I am, there's a majority. We have an A1 amendment. Who has the A1 amendment? Please unmute yourself and take credit. Seeing none.
Mr. Chair, I think that was my typo. I think I was trying to indicate to you we have the A3 amendment, not the A1. I think the A3 amendment is the only amendment we have before us. So I think we are done with amendments for this particular bill.
All right, Representative Gomez.
Thanks. You had me sweating for a second there, Mr. Chair. I was like, uh-oh, is there another amendment I don't know about? So thanks for hearing this bill. I know I appreciate the committee's indulgence given sort of the late timing and what we're going to have to do to make this work. So 4611 provides funding for COVID-19 emergency community relief grants. I think this committee probably has discussed at length more than most of the rest of the legislature, the unprecedented economic crisis that we find ourselves in. You guys have been on the front lines of our state response, but this is sort of something to add to the work that's already been done here. I think we're all hearing from our constituents about the pain that's being felt in our communities across the state. There was just a new report today about unemployment statistics. 20% of Minnesotans are unemployed or impacted by job or wage loss. The national rate is in the mid-teens, but they think it's actually more like 20 if you account for it, right? So this is like, we haven't seen this level of unemployment since the Great Depression. We've been pretty much completely wiped out the job growth of the last decade in the last 2 months, which is just a really kind of shocking situation to find ourselves in. And as you all know, 70% of our economy is driven by consumer spending. And so, that means that the household economies of people across the state of Minnesota are really what is going to drive our recovery and determine how long it will take and how deep the pain will be. The feds have responded with certainly in my life, an unprecedented stimulus bill. I know you guys have discussed the CARES Act in this committee extensively, but it's really, economists across the spectrum and, a democratically controlled House of Representatives and a Republican Senate and a Republican president signed into law this really huge effort to keep businesses and families afloat during these times. We have, there's been a lot of, support for businesses, including the Paycheck Protection Program, which I know you guys have discussed a lot in this committee. And also, the efforts to support, again, those household economies, individuals, families, to make it through this time of job loss. And so the expansion in UI, the top up, the stimulus payments, these are all designed to kind of bolster these families and keep our economy moving. And there are problems with some of these things, right? The Paycheck Protection Program, I think we all heard a lot about in the news. I think that that it bypassed a lot of our small businesses in our communities across the state. It was difficult for businesses that didn't have that sort of professional services support to get in line because it was a first come, first serve fund. So the funds were diminished really quickly. The state of Minnesota stepped up to that and developed our own programs, indeed, because we saw that there were gaps in what the federal stimulus was able to do for our businesses. And so 4611 is really an effort to do that same thing with the individuals and families across our state who are experiencing unprecedented economic shocks. So, you know, there are thousands of Minnesotans who are really vital to our communities and are doing essential work, who contribute to our tax base through, you know, paying individual taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, but who are completely left out of programs like the federal stimulus and unemployment insurance, which is designed to support our communities through this crisis. This bill creates the COVID-19 Emergency Community Relief Program, which is a $50 million relief fund. Grant funds are to be split equally between the metro area and greater Minnesota. They will provide they'll be provided to individuals who are experiencing financial hardship because of COVID-19 and who otherwise are not able to access the federal support. So some of this is like if they've experienced job or wage loss but are ineligible for unemployment. Some people who rely on income from tips or earnings that are not included in unemployment calculations are not able to realize the wage replacement level that they need to make it through. And there are also a number of people who won't qualify for or will face significant difficulty and delays in accessing the federal stimulus dollars. So the maximum grant award from this program would be $1,500, up to $1,500. And individual awards would be given out based on demonstrated need and available resources. The change that we made from using, you know, the deed commissioner and the Minnesota Council on Foundations to relying instead on the community action agencies across the state of Minnesota, one of the main reasons that we made that decision was because it's the most quick and efficient way to get these funds into the hands of individuals and families who need it the most. And when you talk about, I mean, the reason that I think we were able to come together again across bipartisan lines at the federal level and get unprecedented stimulus into the hands of individuals is because we know that people who are struggling financially are going to go spend that money. It's not going into a bank account. It's not going to go to, it's going to essential services. I read in the media that most of the $1,200 stimulus checks were spent on food. You know, so this is really basic goods that folks are accessing. Yeah, so DHS is going to award the money to the community action agencies using a formula that's in statute that uses population and some measures of poverty to distribute the funds. It does result, using the formula and statute does result in a pretty even split between greater Minnesota and the metro. So the community action agencies are statewide. They have the infrastructure to get money out to families and people in need. And they have a way that they both distribute money themselves, and then they also do sub-grants to agencies serving culturally specific communities. So that ensures that, you know, folks who don't have a relationship maybe with the community action agency can still access the funds through the sub-grant process. So some of the specific people that this would help, you know, it would alleviate pressures on families who are supporting adult children or other family members with disabilities who are left out of the federal stimulus payments. High school students who relied on their jobs to save for college or help their families, but lost their jobs due to this crisis are not eligible for unemployment. So if you're enrolled in high school, even if you're over 18 and you have a family yourself, for example, you cannot collect unemployment if you lose your job. This bill will also support tipped workers whose unemployment payments don't reflect the actual wage loss that they experienced. And you'll hear today from a couple of testifiers about how this bill will support college students who have been left out of federal stimulus and new Americans and their families who are falling through the gaps. And with that, I'd like to invite us to move over to our testimony.
Well, if you'll hold on just a moment. Representative Stevenson and Representative Backer, you have questions you want to wait till after the testifiers, or are these questions for Representative Gomez?
Mr. Chair, my question is for Representative Gomez, but I'm also happy to wait until after the testifiers.
Then why don't you go ahead, and Representative Backer can come up next. Go right ahead. Representative Stevenson.
Mr. Chair, Representative Gomez, I'm just wanted to inquire about the language in the A3 amendment relative to culturally specific populations. Can you talk about why that language is important to the bill?
Representative Gomez. Representative Gomez.
Oops, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Stevenson. Apologies. So the reason that we included the language about culturally specific communities is because what we have seen as this crisis has unfolded is that it's not impacting communities in a way that's equal. There's also this, I certainly feel, I don't know if other people are experiencing this, that the COVID-19 is revealing realities that have been present in our communities for a long time, but it's sort of an intense shock like this reveals the stresses on the system, right? So I think that's happening in healthcare and in economic security. You know, the fact that we have a situation where 40% of families couldn't withstand an unforeseen $400 expense means that we have so many people in our communities who are just really on the margins. And unfortunately, because of historical realities, race and poverty are heavily correlated in our communities, in our country. So, you know, the unemployment rate pre-COVID-19 in Minnesota was 3.5%. Statewide, it was double that for African Americans. In certain neighborhoods, like in Minneapolis, that I represent, there are estimates that unemployment of Black Minneapolitans was in the mid-teens. And there's a lot of different reasons for this, but it means that the economic shocks have impacted communities in a way that's disproportionate and that reflects underlying disparities that already exist in our state and in our country. You know, I think a lot of us have read with just kind of dismay and heartbreak it's mostly other places, because our deaths are really concentrated in congregate care, which is not the case everywhere. But there's been a real disparity in the infections and deaths relative to the percentage of different racial and ethnic minorities in the population. So, you know, I mean, the other thing, of course, is that it's not just the virus that's hitting people disproportionately, that's hitting communities of color and indigenous communities disproportionately. It's also the economic stress. You know, people of color and indigenous people are more likely to work in the service industry, which is one of the hardest hit industries in the country. There are also people of color and indigenous people are also more likely to be deemed essential workers, less likely to be able to work from home. And so we're kind of seeing some of these like broader demographic inequities, those realities reflected in the impacts of COVID-19, both on health and economic security. And so this was designed because there is that element to this, to kind of evaluating who's been left out of the stimulus that aligns with some cultural communities that are bearing a disproportionate burden. And so that's an attempt, calling that language out specifically and making sure that the community action partnerships were equipped to serve those communities was an important, just an important aspect of trying to really address the issue that's in front of us.
Representative Backer.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if this question is for you, Chair, or for the bill author, but my question deals with, shouldn't this go to HH Finance instead of Ways and Means? Why is this going to Ways and Means instead of HHS Finance?
That would be a question for me, because HHS indicated to me that they don't have any hearings coming up, period. So that, and that was a suggestion by the chair of HHS to send it to Ways and Means.
And Chair, I appreciate that candidness because you're listening to him, but I want to go on point of record that, we have proper protocol. This does have finance bills with Health and Human Service that deals with that. I've served on that committee for a number of years. I know some other members have too. To me, it makes sense. That's the proper protocol, and we in government needs to follow that. I appreciate you asking that, but that's I think that's a bad precedent, skipping a vital committee because it does follow under their agenda, and so forth. So I'm clear about that.
And Representative Backer, to give you a little bit of an answer there, that's why I mentioned early on and explained what was going on and said that we would try to stick with who the people would be served, how much they were requesting, and how it will be processed. I know the pandemic has thrown so many things off, and so many things have we've had to improvise at some level. I truly believe that every bill that we try to include someplace, somehow, needs to have intelligent people asking the questions of who, what, why, and where. And I'm hoping that this committee can make for the public that may be watching, understand what this bill does. And I hope that anyone who sits on the HHS tries to take a look at this particular video, because we are recording. And I apologize, but I don't think this was the last opportunity for a bill like this to help people, particularly people in poverty and of ethnic origin. So with that, Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Gomez, I apologize if you already covered this, but I have an earbud in for government ops too, so I'm kind of trying to split myself. As far as the tipped employee provisions go, would that be retroactive, or is this just going to be like a one-time lump sum that they would get at one, or would they be able to kind of get additional funding? Because I have a constituent who is trying to support a family while working at Benihana's, and it's been pretty difficult. He's also a foster parent, and so this is a real issue for him.
Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Cagle. Yeah, so this is designed to be it's a one-time payment up to $1,500 per individual or family, and so unfortunately, it wouldn't provide that ongoing replacement of the tip wages, but we're hoping that it could fill in a little gap for someone, help them pay a rent or mortgage payment when they're struggling. Thank you.
Would you care to bring up your witnesses?
Yeah, that would be great.
I think I have Sue Brown, Minnesota Council of Foundation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm pleased to be here today to testify in support of House File 4611 as amended by the A3.
Could you please identify yourself for the tape?
Yes, my name is Susie Brown. I'm the president of the Minnesota Council on Foundations. We're a membership organization of Minnesota's philanthropic community, about 140 philanthropy organizations throughout the state of Minnesota. We are in support of this bill and really interested in this issue, largely because we have created the Minnesota Disaster Recovery Fund for the same reasons that Representative Gomez is working on this bill. We recognize that there's significant gaps in the ability for people who are hurting from COVID-19 to receive resources. And in the philanthropic field, we've decided to respond to that by pooling resources and distributing them throughout the community. And we think that this bill will help with that effort. In the Minnesota Disaster Recovery Fund, we've raised $11 million and distributed $6 million with another $5 million to distribute. And we've focused on grants such as to Think Small, to help childcare providers, Minnesota Area Agency on Aging for older adults, the ARC of Minnesota to serve people with disabilities, and many more. We recognize that even with these efforts, there will still be significant people left out of support, and we hope that this bill can provide that relief. We have recognized many of the same populations that Representative Gomez described as being particularly left out of current programs and have ongoing economic concerns. They include people with various New American and immigration statuses, people who work in the hospitality industry, as was just described, tipped employees, young adults, college-age adults, people with disabilities, and others. I'd like to highlight the fact that in the first version of this bill, the Minnesota Council on Foundation was named as the recipient of the resources and the distributor of the funds. We support the A3 amendment because we believe that the community action agencies are better equipped to receive these resources and distribute the funds to the community. We think this is a very important policy proposal, and we thank Representative Gomez for this work, and we support the proposal as amended. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Ben Engel, Winona Student Body President.
Yeah, hi, Chair Mahoney, representatives, good afternoon.
Please identify yourself for the tape and proceed.
Yep, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Ben Elgin. I'm a board member of the nonprofit organization Students United that advocates on the behalf of students at the 7 Minnesota State universities. I'm here to speak in support of House File 4611 to establish an emergency community relief grant program. Myself and countless other college students across the state are not eligible to receive aid from the federal government under the CARES Act because we are claimed as dependents on our parents' tax filings. Despite having paid tuition, rent, and otherwise financially supporting myself on my own for the past 4 years of college, I have not been able to receive the aid that I would otherwise have received due to a single checkbox that I filled in on my taxes. Many students, such as myself, are claimed as dependents because that usually means a few extra $100 on our parents' tax return. But now we as students are missing out on these $1,200 checks when we need support the most. College students are facing difficulty due to the nature of our employment in entry-level service jobs, those being closed, our temporary housing situations, the burden of carrying a significant amount of debt, and uncertain prospects after graduation. All of these issues and the financial insecurity that students face have only been exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis. I have seen the conversation on college campuses shift from finishing up schoolwork and graduation to questions of food and housing insecurity. Students are forced to grapple with the very real questions of where their next meal is going to come from and how they're going to pay rent. Students are asking themselves now if they will even be able to return to school next semester. This legislation would directly benefit myself and other Minnesota students who are struggling during this crisis, but would not have otherwise been able to receive support. Another aspect of the CARES Act that has overlooked our student population is in its direct campus support. Funds have been given to universities to distribute to students, but federal guidelines prohibit international, DACA, undocumented students, and more from receiving this much needed aid. Again, students are given the short end of the stick by not receiving this aid that they need in this crisis. I strongly urge you to support this legislation to ensure that all Minnesotans, including students, are being supported in this public health crisis. Thank you for your time and for your support of all Minnesotans.
Thank you, Mr. Engel. Didi Magla?
Yes, hello. My name is Deborah Malaga. I am a Minneapolis resident and public school educator in St. Paul Public Schools. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for hearing us. I'm here to testify about my personal situation of being ineligible for CARES Act stimulus, even though my family meets the financial requirements, and even though my family of 4, 3 of us are US citizens. and one is a non-citizen, and that's why we're ineligible. My family is made up of four, like I said, my husband and me, and then we have two children, ages 2 and 5. My kids were born in Minneapolis, and I'm also a U.S. citizen by birth. My husband is from Mexico. Our marriage petition is going through the immigration process, and it's been, we're about halfway done. It's been over 2 years. We have an immigration attorney who's helped us along the way. It's just, this is how long it takes. And so in the meantime, my husband files his taxes with a tax ID number that's issued by the IRS. And I was extremely saddened, actually, and hurt when I found out that our whole family would be excluded from the CARES Act just because because one person on our tax account or on our taxes uses a tax ID number, our entire family was deemed ineligible. This includes my 2 children and, of course, myself, who are U.S. citizens. I do understand why he can't receive the money at this point while his case is still pending, but I found it very difficult to understand why the U.S. citizens in my family and all mixed status families were also excluded. I did, like at the end of March, I consulted with my tax preparer. I wrote to Senator Klobuchar, Senator Tina Smith, and asked, because it wasn't very clear, analysis was still going on, and even our tax preparer wasn't sure if we would qualify. And I was getting mixed recommendations, I would say, about what to do. And at one point I was told I should probably amend my taxes and try to file as head of household. But our attorney said that we can't do that, and that it's just the way the CARES Act was written, that all mixed status families are excluded unless one of the individuals has military service. That's the only way around it. As I said, I'm an educator. I'm a school counselor. I've been in St. Paul Public Schools for 14 years. My husband earns $14 an hour. He was just made an essential worker. He works in the green industry in transportation, and he's ineligible for health insurance. And I've never been able to add him to my employee-sponsored health insurance because he doesn't have a Social Security number, as our immigration case is still pending. And so I feel like he's in a precarious situation because he doesn't have a Social Security number, and so his work, it's insecure. Even though he's an essential worker, he could lose that position at any time. And also the fact that he doesn't have health insurance and that I can't cover him is very stressful for our family. We obviously could have greatly benefited from the CARES Act. In our case, it would have been $1,200 for me and then $500 for each child. We are fortunate right now that as an educator, I'm working from home and he's working right now. But I'm really here to speak on behalf of other mixed status families who don't have the same fortune that we do right now. And in many families, both of the adults are out of work or have extremely reduced hours, and they're not eligible. We're not eligible for the CARES Act, the stimulus funding. In my personal family's case, the CARES Act was really the only thing that we did qualify because we fit right into sort of middle income. So our income is too high to qualify for the aid, like through the city of Minneapolis that was offered earlier or last month, or other types of assistance. We're right in the middle where we're struggling, but we don't qualify for much other aid other than that stimulus fund in the CARES Act. Let's see, I feel that excluding an entire mixed status family is unethical and cruel, and especially, in situations where people have their immigration case pending. In my husband's case, he was scheduled for biometrics, which is a very important milestone in the process of immigration status adjustment. He had that on May 19th, and the office in St. Paul, where he was scheduled to get his fingerprints done, closed on March 18th. I'm sorry, I misspoke. His appointment was March 19th, and their office closed on March 18th, the day before his appointment. And this is the case for many families, that their immigration petitions are in limbo right now. They're on pause, and we have no projected timeline. So if there are future stimulus payments, or as we don't know how long this will go on, my family will continue to be ineligible. And the only way we could be eligible is if the immigration petition were to go through, but it happens to be on pause at the same time. I recently learned that according to the Minnesota State demographer, there are 175,019 mixed status households in Minnesota. And it's a very large number. Nationwide, it's closer to 16 million. And so I think as a group of families, we were all left out. And there's a huge range among all of us of what our need is, but I would argue that the majority of mixed status families are in a lot of financial need right now based on employment, lost wages and lost employment. And so I speak in support of House File 4611 as amended, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Deb Brandt from the United Community Action Partnership.
Greetings. I'm Deb Brandt from United Community Action Partnership. Chair Mahoney and members of the committee, United Community Action Partnership, or UCAP, serves 9 counties in southwest Minnesota and have offices in Wilmer, Litchfield, Hutchinson, Olivia, Redwood Falls, Marshall, and Jackson. And on behalf of community action agencies around the state, I am testifying in support of the A3 amendment for House File 4611 as amended. UCAP, like other community action agencies, helps families meet their basic needs and supports them in their efforts to move out of poverty. We do this by providing a wide variety of services such as Head Start, public transportation, energy assistance, weatherization, emergency housing, homelessness assistance, food shelves, volunteer income tax assistance sites, and many more. Community action agencies have a deep connection and ties in our communities and are a trusted resource. One of the strengths of community action is our tripartite governance model, where we have equal representation on our board of directors from public, private, and consumer sector. This allows for a very broad and diverse community perspective to have local voices at the table who have local decision-making power. Through our existing programs and services, we already have processes and procedures in place to provide direct payments to landlords and utility providers on behalf of our clients. We are set up to pay vendors directly versus cash assistance grants going to clients. We also deal with multiple funding streams, state, federal, local, and foundations, and have systems in place to track each individual grant and or contract. At UCAP, we have seen firsthand the increased need for our services due to COVID-19. For many people who need assistance at this time, we are able to help by connecting them or enrolling them in already existing programs, but some of the members of our community are left out. And a big reason for this is the income and or eligibility requirements that are part of many current programs. We are seeing a domino effect in the housing area. Tenants are right on the edge of not income qualifying for current services, so they are not able to pay their rent. So now we've got landlords who are experiencing a loss of income. They now need assistance to meet their basic needs, but because of their past annual income, they do not qualify for many services. We're also seeing the same with our essential workers, CNAs, or the grocery store clerks, many of who are lower wage earners. Their hours have been reduced, but not enough so they can qualify for unemployment. But yet, because they are working, they make too much to meet income eligibility qualifications for many programs. On Tuesday of this week, while it was spritzing outside, we did a food distribution in Marshall at the SMSU campus. And we had college students walk in the rain to distribution because they were hungry. They too are unable to access services, again, due to eligibility reasons. These are just several examples of community needs that are unmet by current programs due to eligibility requirements. Community action agencies are poised and ready to allocate these funds in a collaborative, non-duplicating way with local and culturally specific organizations in our areas. And on behalf of Minnesota's community action agencies, I want to thank you for your time and your consideration. And I also want to express our deepest gratitude for the work that you as legislators are doing to keep Minnesota safe and to keep Minnesota strong. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brandt. Appreciate that. Ruby Lee.
Just unmuting. Good afternoon. My name is Ruby Lee. I'm president of CLUS, Comunidades Latinas Unidas en Servicio. We are Minnesota's largest Latino-led organization, serving over 25,000 people in the metropolitan area and greater Minnesota. I want to thank Chair Mahoney for providing this opportunity and this space for us to bring a voice to what we're seeing on the ground as a culturally based organization. I'm here in support of House File 4611, and I'm taking the liberty to represent thousands of Minnesota Latino workers and families who have been dramatically impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. For the last 3 months, our organization has been a community catalyst to support Latinos throughout the state with emergency needs, food, shelter, any resources regarding to employment, access to emergency household needs, diapers, formula for babies, many of the things that become an expense for families that have lost their jobs to no fault of their own. Our COVID-19 crisis hotline that we started has been taking an average of 200 calls per day. That's the number of calls coming in. Many of those are individuals seeking information, seeking support, asking for assistance in navigating the systems, the resources available, or the lack thereof, resources available. As many in our community also are challenged with language and cultural barriers. We in my staff, the staff at CLUS, close to 100 people have been just mobilizing and looking at providing services virtually and over the phone. Through the hotline, we have been taking care of many cases, and now things are evolving. We are now taking calls from people who are actually who have contracted the virus. In many cases, both parents who work in the service industry. A father worked in a restaurant, the mother worked in a hotel. Both parents are now sick, hospitalized. A neighbor is taking care of the children, and yet in their ill bed, they are worried about how to pay the rent and how to put the next meal on the family's table. How are they going to support the children? And being ill is also creating just a huge level of stress for the community. As they're ready to go back to work, certainly they're having to be quarantined and shelter in place. And this is where this bill and this financial support, which even though it's a one-time support, it can help families provide some assistance, financial assistance, which is what most people are coming for. They need assistance to pay the rent. They certainly have huge fear to be evicted. And even if for this month they will not be evicted, they're still accumulating debt. That financial support, even if it's a one-time, will help create more opportunities for these vulnerable groups. We are definitely in support of the bill, or whatever way in which the legislature and the governor can provide support and a lifeline for survival for many of these families that don't have a safety net, don't qualify for any federal assistance, and have no resources to be able to, or preventing them from becoming homeless. So I urge your support. I thank you for your leadership, and just know that organizations like ours, culturally based organizations with the CAP agencies, are ready to help community, to be the navigators and the coaches that can assist the community in surviving this crisis that it's certainly affecting all of us. Thank you, and I stand ready for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. And your clues is right next to my district. You know, you could have had the best legislator, but not quite. It's good to see you again, Ruby.
We keep you as a friend. Thank you so much, Representative Mahoney.
Are there any questions for the witnesses or for the author of the bill? Are there any questions for the author of the bill or any of the witnesses? Seeing none.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Gunther.
Mr. Chairman, I still don't know where the money's coming from. I didn't hear that. Maybe I missed it. Who gets the money?
Gomez.
Where does it come from?
Representative Gomez.
This is Mr. Chair and Representative Gunther. This is a general fund expenditure, so it'll come out of the general fund.
And to add to that, Representative Gunther, we are looking at all options at the present time to see if there's any of this that can be fit into the CARES Act. You're breaking up, Representative Gunther?
I have one other kind of a statement to make.
Go for it.
Like you, I was there was when Governor Plenty ran into the same problem that we're going to run into very soon, in that we're going to be in big deficit, and the law says we have to balance our books. I looked at 10% of every department had to cut their budget. Many state employees were cut off. Many programs were cut out. And I look at small towns and big cities lost their LGA. And even school teachers didn't get their pensions back because that was an easy thing to grab a hold of. And that was not a pleasant thing, as you remember. And because of stuff like that coming out of the general fund, we're just making the problem worse. And I look at all the spending we're proposing. Somebody has to put the brakes on sooner or later. And I think as much as I see the need you're talking about, people are still getting food stamps and still getting MFEP and many other programs. If they aren't getting unemployment with their $600 per week bonus, I look at that $1,200. If they don't qualify for that, that's really too bad that they fell through the cracks. I haven't seen my $1,200 yet either. But anyway, I look at the people in my district make less than people in MFEP. And many of them do. And it's over minimum wage. And it's pretty hard for me to vote for something that is coming out of the budget that we know we're going to have to make up for in increased taxes or something. So I think since Minnesota is the second highest or third highest tax state in the nation, I don't want to tax all the rest of the people in the middle class. So for those reasons, I can't vote for this bill, although I can see a lot of reasons I would like to. So that's my statement. And I'm sure you remember that government shutdown we had before, and where we had to do all the cutting, it was not a fun experience. And I feel sorry for the people who never had to do it yet.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Please continue, Mr. Chair.
I'm finished. Thank you.
Somebody wanted to respond to that. Chair Mahoney's.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Gunther, for that that statement. You know, I definitely wouldn't advocate for the kind of approach that Tim Pawlenty took to an economic downturn. It's interesting, you know, because obviously I'm new here, but I feel like in many different areas, I keep hearing, you know, Representative Chair Davney talking about how, you know, we haven't ever gotten back to the 2002 levels of investment in our kids. We just last year, you know, I'm on the tax committee, just last year we restored LGA to the inflation adjusted level that it was in 2002. And so in so many areas, you know, and when you, this kind of like long-term structural decrease in local government aid and county program aid means that increasingly counties and cities are having to go to the property taxes in order to meet the basic kind of obligations that they have to provide services to their citizens. So I'm happy to have a conversation about how to fund such a thing. And I am with you in that I would never advocate for raising taxes on middle-class people to pay for our obligations in this moment. But we don't have to. We don't have to tax the middle class in order to raise the revenue that we need to provide for some economic security during these times for the most vulnerable people in our communities. I mean, that's the good news, right? We have many options. You know, House Files 2559 and 2560 are two provisions that conform with the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, commonly known as the Trump tax bill, which, you know, gave a 40% rate cut to corporations in the corporate franchise tax. So there are provisions of that bill that we have, the federal bill that we have not conformed to, that are called guilty and deemed repatriation. They're basically our corporations, the largest corporations in the world, who have stashed profits in offshore tax shelters. So these are two provisions. They're called, you know, we call them base broadeners. So they're sort of an exchange for the rate cut that we gave corporations. So this is a provision that would raise $800 million a year. Middle-class people would not be impacted by it. It would, you know, bring foreign currency back into where it's supposed to be taxed, which is in our country. That's just one example, Representative Gunther, of approaches to what we all know is going to be a really painful budget in the next couple of years.
And Representative Gomez, I'm going to stop you there because we have about 7 to 8 minutes left to your presentation. And I have a multitude of questions. So, and I would tell you to make your answers briefer.
Okay.
Josh, I lost my phone for a minute, so I don't know who is next. So Travis or Representative Haley.
And actually, Rep, we do have Rep Robbins before her.
Representative Robbins and then Haley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy always to defer to my colleagues, but I'll go first real quick. So thank you, Representative Gomez, for bringing this bill. I have to say on the record that I do think it should go to HHS Finance, and if they don't have other meetings scheduled, they should schedule one. We're having a meeting today on Friday. I really think that's what should happen. So I just want to get that on the record. I am on HHS policy, however, so I've heard some of these discussions and wearing that hat for a couple of minutes here, I'd like to ask some first, on the A3, in line 1.7 and 1.8, you talk about how the community action agencies can give the grants to other organizations who then make the grants to individuals. So specifically, what other organizations would qualify to do that? And do they have to have previous experience in lending money? And secondly, would they also be able to charge a 10% administrative fee so the community action agencies take 10% and then these other organizations take 10%?
Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Robbins, for that question. Just to clarify quickly, it's these are grants, it's not lending. So you asked about the sort of sub-grantees experience with lending, I think that's much more complicated. I have spoken with folks from the community action partnerships. They talked about existing relationships that they have with organizations that have reach into the cultural communities in the geographies that they serve, and that these are sort of previously established relationships, because a lot of the programs that they administer need kind of special effort to get the word out into the communities. I think when we talked, and I would ask if, I don't know if Deb Brandt wants to speak briefly about it, but my understanding was that the 10% fee that we, or the 10% administration kind of overhead charge that we put in there was for community action partnerships and DHS. And so I don't know if Deb has anything she'd like to add.
You're calling on a friend, so go for it, whomever.
Chairman Mahoney and representatives, this is Deb Brandt. Yes, community action agencies, in fact, UCAP has done this in order to get organizations, small nonprofits, especially in our diverse communities, up and running. We have actually been the fiscal host for them. And because of that, we have relationships now with them. And we also have contract grantee documentation that we have with them, so that we are able to give them funds, and then we actually are the entity that would monitor them to make sure that the funds are spent in the way that they are supposed to be spent.
Representative Robbins. I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the previous witness, so would community action agencies take 10%? Their sub-grantees take 10%? And how does DHS get any of the 10%? How does that work?
And Representative Robbins, just to share with you, I don't know all the ins and outs of this bill, but in the past, we have been able to keep an administrative fee for that. And there are times, depending upon the language that is given to us in our contract from DHS, it allows us the opportunity to do an administrative fee for a sub-grantee. So it would all depend on the language.
Representative Robbins.
And I would just encourage that language to get cleaned up, because right now, reading it in 1.11 and 1.12, it's not very clear.
Representative Robbins, thank you.
And may I ask one more, Mr. Chair?
Oh, sure, certainly.
Thank you. You did reference documentation, and this could be to Representative Gomez or whoever would like to take it, but it does seem like there's a need to specify the kind of documentation that would be used, whether it's for how they show eligibility or how they are going to be spending the money. I'm referencing 2.1 and the section subdivision 5. There seems to be no criteria or documents required. And also it seems like there's no reporting requirements. And as you know, if this is going to run through DHS, they certainly have had their challenges in regard to documenting and reporting, and that would need to be very robust, I believe. If you would address that, please, and then I'll be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Robbins. Yeah, I am happy to, this bill has another stop, so I'm taking notes, and I'm happy to look into refining those points. And we'll discuss with DHS, adding a reporting requirement. I know that I will say in terms of establishing need, that the community action agencies and the organizations that they work with, I know Ms. Lee, that they have one of the reasons that we're using that network as opposed to other kind of approaches to getting this money to folks is because they already operate in this space and have those criteria kind of set up in-house. So yeah, so I thank you for the questions.
Representative Haley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question for the bill author, Representative Gomez. Up to one-time $1,500 payment. Do you know then if the recipients of those funds would be taxed, both state, FICA, and federal tax?
Representative Gomez.
It's a good question. Again, one of the reasons that we are working with community action partnerships is because, as Ms. Brandt mentioned, they have those pre-existing relationships with utility companies and a way to pay landlords directly. I know that up to $600 becomes this place where you have to file. You'd have to issue a 1099, I believe. But I don't know if Ms. Brandt has other ideas about that.
Ms. Brandt.
No, I don't at this time. Sorry.
Thank you. Representative Haley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, I'll be brief. $50 million is a lot of money from the general fund with a significant budget shortfall that we have right now. I don't feel like this bill is fully vetted. I appreciate the technical questions that Representative Robbins asked. And at this stage of the game, I also serve on HHS Finance, and I'm not comfortable passing a bill out of this committee or voting for it with so many unanswered questions and from a completely different department's budget. I appreciate your background on why we're here today, but it's not prudent to me to rush legislation through that we're really not clear on. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Haley. Representative Kegel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Gomez, thanks for bringing this forward. In my past life, I worked at Community Action Partnership of Ramsey and Washington counties, and so I'm very familiar with the program requirements and all the reporting that community action agencies need to do. And so I see this as kind of a perfect fit to house a program like this. There's, the partnerships and the community credit that that they have is, everybody knows what a CAP agency is. And then I also just kind of wanted to address the fact that this funding is going to the most needy families, people that really need this funding. And so, child wiped out right below my feet, is really going, I'll just say thanks. Unmute myself.
Okay. Are you done, Representative Kegel? Yeah, okay. Are there any other questions? Are there any other questions?
I have a comment, Chair.
Representative Huzan. Comments?
Yep, I don't have a question, but I have just a comment. I want to thank Representative Gomez for bringing this bill. It's a really important bill. And the one comment I want to make is that families that are suffering right now can't wait. I know the bill may not be perfect. There is no perfect bill. There's always going to be, if we want to support a bill, there is going to be ways we can justify the support. If we want to oppose a bill, there's always going to be ways that we missed a period or a comma or something. I just want to say on the record that I support this bill because I know that families are suffering. And if anything, COVID-19 pandemic has, laid bare on all the inequities and all the ways that we have not invested in communities. So I hope everyone else can support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Huzan. Representative Zong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I just want to reiterate what Representative Hassan said and thank Representative Aisha Gomez for bringing this bill. I'm also a proud co-author of the bill. As most of you know, people of color, indigenous people have been hit hardest by this public health and economic crisis. And this is all about equity work right here. And so I'm very proud of you, Representative Gomez, for carrying this bill and to all the community members out there. We hear you, and we are here to do our job, which is to ensure that everyone gets a fair shake. And so if you're here and are really caring about Minnesotans who often are not at the table and who want to get a fair shake, I encourage you to support this bill and vote green. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to be brief. I'm sorry if I am repeating something that someone else said. I had to step away for a quick call, but I wanted to just comment that the reason why I asked the question about the culturally specific language that you inserted, Representative Gomez, is I think that language is incredibly important. And I agree wholeheartedly with your comments about how the pandemic and the economic crisis that has resulted have disproportionately affected certain communities. And that was part of the conversation on the floor yesterday, and needs to be even a bigger part of the conversation going forward. I really think that it's really important that we be doing something to make sure that all of our communities are able to make it through the other side of this pandemic. And we need to focus on the people who've been left out so far, whether they, be the people of color and the diverse communities, the immigrant communities. And I also think I saw on one of the testifiers a native Champlinite talking about college students and how they've been left out as well. And so I really applaud you being the voice for the voiceless and trying to help the people who've been left out so far. And thank you for bringing the bill.
Are there any other comments? Then the chair has one, and then we'll take a roll call. And I have 10% left on my battery, so I'll be brief. Up until about 48 hours ago, this bill, and I understand people's concerns, this bill was directed through deed versus through the community actions. And we really got the final answer yesterday afternoon, yesterday evening. So again, I apologize for having the title with an HHS, but it had been scheduled to come here, and it was actually in the preview the way it was previously written of the Jobs Committee. So with that, the clerk will take the roll.
Representative Mahoney.
Aye. Oh, wait. I have to make the motion for House File 4611 as amended to be passed and sent to Ways and Means.
We can open it back up and send
Start
it.
over again, Zach and Josh.
Representative Mahoney.
Aye.
Representative Newer.
Aye.
Representative Gunther.
No.
Representative Backer. Representative Baker. Representative Claflin.
Yes.
Representative Dabney.
Aye.
Representative Eklund. Representative Haley.
No.
Representative Hassan.
Yes.
Representative Cagle.
Yes.
Representative Kosnick.
No.
I'm sorry, Rep, what was that?
No.
Representative Mecklin.
Nay.
Representative Moran. Representative Robbins.
No.
I don't know. I just tried to.
My apologies, I have a grandfather clock next to me and that would have been a little bit loud. Representative Sundin.
Aye.
Representative Stevenson.
Aye.
Representative Zhang.
Yes.
Representative Backer.
No.
Representative Eklund.
I'm sorry. I'm
Yes.
trying to get into this call.
Okay, so I will do a follow-up.
Moran.
So I got 119 and 390.
Yep, and just let us know.
Representative Moran. Aye. Mr. Chair, we have 11 ayes.
And nays?
Six, Mr. Chair.
Representative Gomez, your bill passes on 11-6. You're on your way to Ways and Means. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members.
Could the folks from DEED come down and explain their concerns and their problem? And what might be a bill if we have to have another hearing?
Mr. Chair, this is Kevin McKinnon, Deputy Commissioner of Economic Development from DEED. And I'll just walk through some of the changes that we're looking at from the bill that's before you, if that's okay. Do you want me to start?
Please do.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Members, I think this morning maybe, go ahead, Representative Mahoney.
I'm not sure. Did you identify yourself for the tape?
I did. Kevin McKinnon,
Okay,
Deputy
go right ahead.
Economic Development. So I think this morning there was an enterprise bill that passed state GovOps maybe that addressed some of this for direct appropriations. But we've been looking through our programs and obviously the deadlines that exist for a lot of the grants and loans and types of things that we provide to the communities and businesses in those communities. And so we have a few technical changes that I want to bring before you in the bill that was circulated amongst the committee. The first is related to the Job Creation Fund. This is one of our main programs that we use to facilitate investment in job creation. There's a variety of projects that have been awarded over the past year or so, who under the law are required to create a minimum of 10 jobs within the first year, or 5 jobs in greater Minnesota or in targeted communities. The change that we're looking for at line 2.27 would provide another 12 months essentially to those businesses to allow them as a result of the pandemic another year to create the necessary jobs that are required under the program. Similarly, on line 4.5, this is related to Minnesota Statute 116J.994. This is referring to business subsidy law. And generally with business subsidy law, when we enter into agreements, recipients have 2 years in which to achieve the goals that are stated in the application or the program. What we are currently allowed to do under this law is that we can work with the city in which the business is located and the business. If they are close to achieving their goals, we are allowed to extend them for 1 year. And so what we're asking here in this language is that we would add an additional year to that, given that we do have some in their 3rd year right now, and who are going to be impacted, going to likely be impacted by this. The third change that I'll just mention is on line 5.19. This is related to our host community program. The host community program is essentially defined as cities located in the 7-county metro area that's the site of a waste disposal facility and that accepts municipal solid waste generated in the metro. And every year there's a base number of 875,000 in that program. And by June 30th, we require that the projects are under contract and are proceeding. We would ask that that be extended for another year as well. And then line 10.7 is a new program that was created last year, the Airport Infrastructure Renewal Program that passed the legislature. This is a program that provides grants to cities, counties, or airport authorities to facilitate business development on airport property. This funding, when it was approved last year, had to be under contract and moving by June 30th of this year. We did a RFP in concert with MnDOT late last year, got all the responses back early this year, and have made some awards and are currently working to get everybody under contract. But we're unfortunately running out of time for those projects to actually get moving. So we would request that that project be or that program be extended through 2022. And so with that, Mr. Chair, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try and address those.
Do we have questions for the testifier? Interesting. Well, thank you, Mr. McKinnon. This is a want that you are trying to get through. I don't know if we will have time to get it through. We may have to try and attach it to something, I don't know. But I did want the committee to at least hear your request and have it explained to them. We do have a question from Representative Robbins. Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I wasn't able to raise my hand as quickly as I'd wanted. I have two questions, Mr. McKinnon, if you don't mind. On the airport infrastructure renewal program, so you're asking for a 2-year extension just to finalize the contracts, and then how long will those contracts go? Could you clarify that for me?
Mr. McKinnon.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative Robbins, the money would essentially be available until June, I think, of 2022. So it's not to do the contracts, it's to complete the projects and reimburse the cities or the airport authorities for that, for those expenses by that time.
Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. McKinnon, this is an additional 2 years where the other extensions you were asking for is just an additional 1 year. Am I following this?
Mr.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Representative Robbins, essentially the way that the program would have been set up is that the projects had to be completed by June 30th of next year. And so what we're suggesting is give them a little bit more time to complete their projects, which is another year. Yes.
And if I might,
Representative Robbins.
Thank you, sir. It seems like people are so hungry and eager to work. What's the delay? Like, if they could get to work right away, and is it because of the social distancing that they can't perform the work, or what would be, my sense is people would be eager and ready to do this on time. So what is driving the extension? Thank you.
Mr. McKinnon.
Mr. Chair, Representative Robbins, what's driving the extension is, first of all, getting people under contract. But then once they're under contract, we need to make sure that the funds are committed and the projects are able to move forward. Probably no surprise, there is some hesitation right now from a timing perspective as to when the projects might happen. And so that's what we're trying to account for.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Representative Haley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. McKinnon. Just a number of questions. If the grantees cannot proceed, do they incur penalties? Second question is there a fiscal impact if we make this decision? And last, is this something that needs to be done now or immediately before our general session ends, or could this be something we address during a potential special session? Thank you.
Mr. McKinnon.
Thanks, Mr. Chair and Representative Haley. As far as the grantees are concerned, what happens if there is no project? If there is no project, the money, obviously we wouldn't expend the money until there's a contract and they actually have invested, and that's when we then reimburse. So if the projects don't proceed, those monies will cancel by that time. I think the second question was related to fiscal impact. These monies were appropriated last year, and so we're utilizing the budget that was appropriated to us last year.
And what was the third, Representative Haley?
The third is is this something that you need us to address before the end of session, or could this wait for a potential special session?
Mr. McKinnon.
Yeah, thanks, Representative Mahoney, for getting that repeated. Yes, so on June 30th, both the AIR program and the host community do have firm deadlines. And then with the Job Creation Fund and the Business Subsidy Law, those are coming due here basically monthly over the next 6 months. And so these are projects that are in your communities today that we would just like some flexibility to extend them rather than ultimately having those projects come to you and having to deal with it later.
Representative Haley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And one follow-up. Do you see this being an issue for other deed grant programs? Or is this, being that you've brought these 4 programs to our attention today, is this the only programs within deed that you have this or would require this extension?
Or might you profit, Mr. McKinnon, from us waiting till the special session in June?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative Haley. So as I mentioned at the start, I believe there are some bills. There was a bill passed this morning that did deal with a lot of the direct appropriations that are the things that we were also looking at. These were the programs that we identified that would have grantees that would be impacted more immediately. And we were looking at these as one continuation of funding for a couple of the community-related programs, and then as it relates to the Job Creation Fund and the Business Subsidy Law, once businesses or those folks are default per se, once that happens, we immediately have to pursue collections, and so we were trying to obviously delay that as quickly as we can.
Representative Haley,
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
are there any other questions? Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for the presentation. We will see if this is something that can get done this year, this session, or as Representative Haley alluded to, and I did also, you may end up in a special session kind of time. So thank you again. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, thank you and the committee members as well for allowing us to talk about these. I would also offer, if you want, a response to the letter from HAP that was submitted to the committee. I'll leave that to you if you'd like me to comment on that, or just at another time we can discuss that.
I think if there's another hearing, you should probably just discuss it. I don't know that I've had the time lately to look at many letters.
Right.
Thank you so very much.
You bet.
Is there any other business before the committee? I see no other business before the committee. Again, I apologize for today's the hearing on the bill. Sometimes we have to improvise. Having said that, members, I don't know that we will or will not have another hearing. I was not expecting to have this one. So there may be another one. Keep abreast of everything and watch your emails. Thank you so very much. The committee stands adjourned.